Everybody, welcome to the live stream. I'm gonna try to hold the camera steady. I'm using my phone and I try very hard to hold it steady, but it's hard. So I'm gonna hold it as steady as possible, the camera, the video, the phone. So we're gonna look at a book today, a Canadian book about a Canadian serial killer named Colonel Russell Williams. And unfortunately, the cover up was bigger than what you probably would think. Because, well, you may not, first off, you may not know what happened. So, if you're American, this was a Canadian serial killer, Colonel Russell Williams, who there was a big cover up in the Canadian military and the police. The Canadian police helped cover it up because he was the bully, he was a buddy. This military guy, the military commander of all of Canada, was like friends with all the Canadian police officers. They were all buddies. So the Canadian police didn't want to admit that their buddy, the Colonel Russell Williams, the base commander of all of Canada, was a serial killer and a rapist. So the Canadian police covered up for Colonel Russell Williams for many years. And when the Canadian women would call to report that Colonel Russell Williams had raped them, the Canadian police would call them crazy and call them liars and hang up on them. And then the Canadian police would do nothing to help the women. And then for years, the Canadian women would complain, and then the Canadian women sued the Canadian military, and the Canadian women sued the Canadian police for the cover up. But what Americans don't know is this guy is linked to missing American women too. And this was especially covered up by the Canadian government, the government of Canada. So the government of Canada, they think that Canadians are better than Americans. The government of Canada thinks that Canada is like the best country in the world and that they're always making fun of Americans that live in trailer parks and stuff. And Canada, as you know, there's no Second Amendment in Canada. There's no gun rights. Canadians are not armed. Canadians do not have the right to have a firearm for self-defense. Canadians do not have the right to have guns, and Canada is very strict about gun control. And Canada is always pushing gun control on, well, Canada, first off, there's no guns in Canada to begin with, anyways. So only the police have guns in Canada. So the police can pretty much do whatever they want, the Canadian police, because no one has guns to defend themselves. So when a woman is being raped by a Canadian police officer or by a Canadian military guy, Canadian women are defenseless pretty much, right? So, but of course, Canada also is promoting gun control in the United States. And a lot of the gun control campaigns in the United States are actually promoted by Canada. So Canada has been the country that has been pushing the gun control agenda on Americans, trying to disarm as many Americans as possible. And what Americans also don't know is there are still missing American women, presumed missing, and it was probably this guy who did it. This Canadian military commander is responsible for the missing American women. And because the government of Canada never wants to admit when they're wrong, and the government of Canada never wants to admit to horrible stuff like what this guy did to Canadian women too, especially the government of Canada, the Canadian government, Canada did not want to start a war between the United States and Canada, because what do you think would happen when it's found out that a Canadian military commander is responsible for the many missing American women? The American government would freak out, right? And Canada didn't want that. And then also Canada would have to pay, right? Because I'm sure the American families would sue the Canadian government, they'd sue the Canadian military, and they would sue the Canadian police for the cover up and for the fact that their missing American loved ones are still missing. So this is why there was a big cover up, not just about what he did to Canadian women, because the Canadian police tried to cover up what he did to Canadian women. And then Americans don't even know that the many missing Americans that are still presumed missing were probably because of this guy. He's the one who did it. And the Canadian government covered up the evidence because the Canadian government is always destroying evidence, right? And the Canadian government is very corrupt. And so I usually do live streams about Elon Musk, but Elon Musk, at the end of the day, is not like the worst guy in the world. The worst guy in the world is this guy, 100%. This guy is a monster, and he was the military base commander of all of Canada. And many missing American women, Canada covered it up. Canada covered up the fact that this guy, not only did he is the responsible for the missing Canadian women and for the Canadian women that were raped and murdered, but this guy's probably also responsible for the many missing American women. And unfortunately, the Canadian government, the government of Canada, the snooty Canadian government that thinks the French Canadians, they're all rich elites and they all live in $1 million homes and they make fun of poor people. And the rich French elite Canadians, the rich French Canadians, they make fun of poor Americans that live in trailer parks. And they think that crazy Americans should not be able to have guns. The French Canadians believe in gun control. The French Canadians don't allow Canadians to have guns to defend themselves. And the French Canadians also don't think that crazy Americans should be able to have guns, and they think only the police should have guns. And they also covered up the fact that Colonel Russell Williams, this Canadian military commander of all of Canada, who was turned out to be a rapist and a serial killer, he probably also is responsible for the many missing American women. So that's pretty big. That's a pretty big Canadian scandal, pretty big Canadian cover up. And how do you think that the American families are going to react when they realize that the reason that they could never find their missing American wife, missing American, whoever the woman happened to be in their lives, maybe it was the mother, maybe it was the wife. The reason they couldn't find these missing Americans is because it was committed by a Canadian serial killer the whole time. And the Canadian government covered it up. And there's even many missing American women that went missing near the Canadian border, near Canadian military bases. There's literally missing American women who went missing near the Canadian border. And you would have thought that they would have said, hey, this serial killer, this rapist who's the Canadian military commander of all of Canada, maybe he did it. Maybe he's the reason why these American women who went missing near the Canadian border, maybe it's because of this Canadian serial killer, psychopath, Colonel Russell Williams. But of course, the Canadian military covered it up. The government of Canada covered it up. And the Canadian government covered up the fact that this military commander of all of Canada is probably responsible for the many missing American women. So it's sad. It's really sad. And Canada is so corrupt, and Canada is always acting as if they're better than Americans. The Canadian government is always making fun of poor Americans that live in trailer parks, while the rich French Canadians, they live in $1 million homes and they drink $1,000 bottles of champagne and they go on trips to exotic islands and they go on trips to Hawaii and they go on trips to islands like Barbados. And all these rich Canadians, these rich Canadian elites, these rich French Canadians that live in these $1 million homes, and then they make fun of poor Americans that live in trailer parks, and they push the gun control agenda. They are trying to disarm Americans. The Canadian government has been behind most of the gun control campaigns, and they are trying to disarm as many Americans as possible. So I think America needs to do an investigation into the missing American women that could be linked to this Canadian psychopath, Colonel Russell Williams, who, by the way, he is also a cross-dresser. So you know how Trump is making fun of all the cross-dressing weirdos? Well, this cross-dressing weirdo also happened to be a serial killer and a rapist. And we could just flip through some of the pages and you'll see there's a whole page that shows how he was a cross-dresser and how he stole women's underwear and he went into women's lingerie. He stole women's lingerie and he raped women and he murdered women. And this Canadian serial killer, this Canadian military commander, is probably responsible for the many missing American women. And the Canadian government, the government of Canada, the Canadian government covered this up. So let me, the page where, I don't remember this book inside and out. I read it, but I read it a long time ago. I read it years ago. And I'm trying to remember which page has all the article about where they talk about how he was a cross-dresser and he was a weirdo. But to be honest, most Canadian police officers are weirdos. And most Canadian military guys are weirdos. I mean, it's as if every weirdo decided to become a military person or a Canadian police officer because they realized that, hey, they're a weirdo and they're probably in danger. So they're going to become a Canadian police officer so that they have the power and they have control. So that when someone calls to complain about the weirdos, well, you're calling the Canadian police who are the weirdos. So they're going to take the side of the weirdos, if that makes sense. So that's probably why a lot of Canadian weirdos like cross-dressers and other kind of sketchy people become Canadian police officers and Canadian military guys. So anyways, I can't find the page, but it's in here. And I mean, you could, if you want to buy this book, it's not that expensive. I mean, like not for me, but I'm saying if you want to buy this online, right? I think it's like, I can't remember how much it is. It's not that expensive, I don't think. When I bought it, it wasn't that expensive. And I mean, if you're a person that wants to, like, see about the connection between him and the missing American women, then I suggest you could even just search the news articles online too. I mean, you could Google search Colonel Russell Williams. If you Google search Colonel Russell Williams, a lot of the news articles will come up. How the victims of Colonel Russell Williams, they sued the Canadian police. They sued the Ontario Provincial Police for the cover up and all the evil stuff that the Canadian police did. And yeah, so if anyone comes to the live stream and they have any questions, I'm going to open up the floor to questions right now. And I'll do about 30 seconds. I'll wait for some questions. I don't think that there's anyone in here right now. I did see a couple people pop in to the live stream, but I think they left now. So if there's anyone currently watching, do you have any questions about this serial killer? Do you have any questions about this Canadian military commander who's probably also responsible for the many missing American women? He was a military commander of Canada who raped and murdered women for years. He was the military commander of all of Canada. He raped and murdered Canadian women. And there was a big cover up. The Canadian military covered it up. The Canadian police covered it up. And they also covered up the fact that he's probably responsible for the many missing American women. So if there's anyone who has any questions, I mean, I read the book, but I read it like several years ago. So I kind of, I remember a lot, but I don't remember everything. So if anyone has any questions about the book or this guy, just ask the questions in the live stream and I'll try to answer the questions. And I'm going to do this for about a minute. I'll wait a minute for some questions and then I'm going to wrap up the live stream. So this is your chance to ask questions. Please ask questions now. Also, please subscribe to the channel if you like to read interesting books. I have another book too while we're waiting for questions. This book's also interesting. It's about, I guess, the US, the American military. So this one's about the American military. A really interesting book about the experience of these military guys. But these guys were actually heroes. Unlike, so there are good military guys, and the American military are full of heroes. But unlike the Canadian military are full of psychopaths like this guy. So really sad. But so yeah, is there anyone who has any questions want to ask before I end the live stream? And by the way, thank you for coming. Please subscribe, and if you can like the video, that would help me out. But other than that, yeah, I don't see any questions. I don't see any questions from anyone. So thank you everyone for coming to the live stream. And please, yeah, someone needs to, the Americans. So I'm from Canada and I know about this scandal because I'm Canadian and I know all of Canada's dirt. I know all the evil, corrupt things the Canadian government did. It would take me like months of live streaming to be able to tell you everything that the Canadian government has done and all the cover-ups. But for now, I'm gonna in this live stream, I'm showing you this and how this guy, this Canadian military commander, is probably also responsible for the many missing American women. And the Canadian government covered this up. The government of Canada, who thinks they're better than Americans, who thinks Canada is a better country, who thinks that Americans should not have guns, who pushes the gun control agenda on Americans and tries to disarm as many Americans as possible. The Canadian government, who the rich French Canadians that live in $1 million homes, and then they laugh and they make fun of poor Americans that live in trailer parks, and they think that crazy Americans should not have guns. And the French Canadians are the rich elites, the rich elite French Canadians. They think that Americans are live in trailer parks and they shouldn't have guns, and that's why they push the gun control agenda on Americans and they try to disarm as many Americans as possible. That same Canadian government that did all that stuff, they also covered up the fact that this military commander of Canada is probably responsible for the many missing American women. And they didn't even want, there was even a cover up with the Canadian women because the Canadian government didn't want to admit that a Canadian military commander of all of Canada was a rapist and a serial killer who raped and murdered of Canadian women. They didn't even want to admit that. And there was a big cover up. And the Canadian victims that survived sued the Canadian police. But on top of that, the Canadian government also covered up the fact that this guy, this military commander of all of Canada, this Canadian military commander, Colonel Russell Williams, is probably also responsible for the many missing American women. Because, of course, once this gets out that this guy is responsible for the many missing American women, suddenly the Americans, they're going to want to do a full investigation. They're going to want to try to find these missing American women. They're probably going to want to send a whole American militia investigation team to Canada. And maybe Trump will take over Canada because of this. Maybe this will be enough evidence, enough reason for Trump to say, you know what, Canada, we're sick of your lies. We're sick of the evil Canadian government and the communism and all of the no rights and no freedom of speech. And maybe this will be the thing that gives Trump enough courage and enough reason to say, hey, that's it. America's taking over Canada. America's sending American military guys. America's sending the police to Canada to arrest the evil Canadian government officials, to arrest the evil Canadian police like military commanders, to arrest the evil Canadian government. Maybe this is what will be it. Maybe this will be enough reason for Trump to say, "Hey, Donald Trump, you're right. Canada is corrupt. And look, this Canadian military commander is probably also responsible for the many missing American women, and the Canadian government covered it up. The Canadian government covered up the fact that the many missing American women that are still presumed missing are probably because of this Canadian government psychopath, this Canadian military commander of all of Canada. And if America sends an investigation team to Canada, imagine if the Americans go through all of Canadian government's files. Imagine if an American investigation team goes to Canada, goes to the Canadian government, and goes through all of the Canadian government's files. Imagine the stuff that you will find. You will find a lot more than just this cover up. You will find how the Canadian government has been pushing gun control on Americans. All of these gun control campaigns, all of these gun control campaigns with the intention to disarm as many Americans as possible, it's all backed and funded by the Canadian government. Most of it is backed and funded by the Canadian government. So the Canadian government has been doing things for years to undermine the United States of America. And so I honestly do think that it would be worth it for Trump to do an investigation, at least an investigation, if not take over Canada completely. I think Donald Trump, the president of the United States of America, currently in the White House, I think it would be in his good interest for him to do a full investigation into Canada and to the many missing American women that could be missing because of this Canadian military commander psychopath, who not only raped and murdered Canadian women for years and got away with it because the Canadian police are criminals, the Canadian police are thugs, the Canadian police are also rapists, the Canadian police are even worse, the Canadian police are also serial killers, and the Canadian people do not have guns to defend themselves. So Laurie Massacott and several of the other victims could not defend themselves from this psychopath because Canadians do not have guns to be able to defend themselves from a corrupt and tyrannical government such as the Canadian government, like this government. The Canadian government is run by psychopaths. The Canadian government is run by sociopaths. The Canadian government is full of rapists and serial killers like this, who was a military commander of all of Canada, and he turned out to be a rapist and a serial killer. So this is the reason, this is a good reason for Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America, to do a full investigation into Canada and all of the corruption of Canada, all of the evil things that the Canadian government has done to try to undermine the United States of America. And maybe this is good enough reason for Donald Trump to say, hey, That's it. America's going to take over Canada because America is tired of all of Canada's lies, of all of the Canadian government's evil stuff that they do, the no free speech, the no human rights. Canada has some of the worst human rights violations. Any country that doesn't allow the citizens to have guns, that's a country that does not have human rights. If the whole reason why Americans have guns is so that the American people can defend themselves against a corrupt government. And if you live in a country where only the police have guns, that's a corrupt government right there. And that is not a country of human rights. And Canada does not have human rights. Canada does not have freedom of speech. Oh, we have a Russian. Oh, welcome. Приятно познакомиться, мой друг. Добро пожаловать на мой канал. Меня зовут Макс. Привет. Как дела сегодня? Добрый вечер. Доброе утро. Я не знаю, который час. Который час для тебя сейчас? Который час? Для меня, я из Канады. И Канада это 8 час. Я думаю, что во время, в настоящее время, это 8 час вечера. 8 час вечера. Я думаю, что привет и добро пожаловать. I don't usually get many Russian speakers, so I saw someone came into the live stream and he did the Russian flag. So that obviously that tells me he's Russian. So I just started speaking Russian because I've been studying the Russian language for years, and I don't usually come across people who speak Russian. It's more, I usually come across a lot of Spanish people, Spanish and Chinese and Mandarin and German, especially when I was in Germany for a few years. So I usually come across a lot of German speakers and Spanish and Chinese, but I don't usually come across a lot of Russian speakers. So that's why I was practicing my Russian. So sorry for people who don't speak Russian, but I just need to practice my Russian just there. But yeah, welcome, добро пожаловать. Подпишитесь на мой канал, пожалуйста. Подпишитесь на мой канал, пожалуйста. И тоже я хочу сказать, что добро пожаловать и приятно познакомиться. И лайк видео, пожалуйста. И если у тебя вопросы, вам можно это возможно спросить меня вопросы. Если у тебя есть вопросы, ты умеешь спрашивайте меня вопросы, если у тебя есть несколько вопросов. So, anyways, I guess I'll just go back to speaking English. I don't see him saying anything in Russian, so. But basically, what I asked him was, I'll just explain what everything I said in Russian for the people who don't speak Russian. I said, hello, welcome to the channel. I don't know what time it is for you. I don't know if you're from Russia. I'm in Canada, and currently in Canada, it's about, I think, 8 p.m. in the evening. And I said, welcome. I said, please subscribe to my channel. Please like. I said, nice to meet you. I also said, if you have any questions, you can ask me some questions and I'll try to respond in Russian. And I said, thank you. I said, for coming to my channel. Welcome to the channel. That's what I said in Russian. So, how about let's read something. Okay, here, I just opened up to a random page. So let's read something randomly. Let's not read that page. Let's read a different page because I don't think there was anything. Oh, I'm not sure. It didn't seem like it, but there might have been. So if you want, we can go back to that page. I'm not sure, but let's go to a different page. I'm trying to find a page that I remember because I did read this book a few years ago, and so I do know there was some really interesting stuff said in this book. Let's go to this 79. I remember page 79. Okay. In those days, the CC-144 Challenger, in which he had circled and swooped in the skies above Shearwater, performed double duty As well as being a reconnaissance and electronic warfare plane, it was a people mover and business jet, and the plane of choice for 412 Squadron. Then as now, the squadron provided transport for important government officials, high-ranking military members, and foreign dignitaries visiting Canada. As well, the squadron provides support for Canadian Forces missions at home and abroad, including medevac flights, though technically under the command of 8th Wing CFB Trenton. The squadron is based in Ottawa, and for the next 6 years, still a captain, Williams' primary task was to fly assorted VIPs back and forth. He later said it was a job and a responsibility he really enjoyed. Plaques from appreciative clients, Governor General Romeo Leblanc, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, Deputy Prime Minister Sheila Copps, hung on the walls of his upstairs office in the shiny new house in Orleans, an East Ottawa suburb that he and Harriman purchased in August 1995 for $165,000. The house was at the end of Wilkie Drive okay, we don't need the exact address, but anyways. Um, so it's really sad because Canada has done so much evil stuff. Like to me also, I used to work for the Canadian military for years. I worked for the Canadian Armed Forces, and I saw a lot of evil stuff going on. Not just what Canada does within Canada, but around the world. And it's like what they did to me, the Canadians, what they did to me, psychopaths like this. And people didn't believe me because Canada, every time Canada goes on the news, they make Canada look like this nice, clean, safe country where there's no corruption and all Canadians are nice. And that's not true because I am Canadian and I experienced a lot of abuse from people like this. I experienced a lot of abuse when I worked for the Canadian military for years, and I was slandered and defamed, and I am a victim, and I am innocent, and I'm a victim, and I was uh, uh, abused, and I was hurt by these Canadian psychopaths like this guy. And what people don't know is for many years, before they finally admitted that this was the guy doing all of the evil stuff, they framed a lot of innocent Canadians. They tried to make it look like they even tried to frame like an African Canadian, right? They framed a whole bunch of innocent people, and they covered up for this guy. The Canadian police covered up for this guy, and then they had the audacity to frame innocent Canadians that had nothing, that did nothing wrong, and they framed those Canadians just so that they could protect this guy. Because the Canadian military, they're a gang of thugs. The Canadian police, they're a gang of thugs. The Canadian government, they're a gang of thugs. They've done a lot of evil stuff. They've hurt me. They've lied about me. And because I worked for the Canadian government for 3 years, and then I got wrongfully fired, I got harassed in the workplace, and I liked the military. I had no reason to go against the military guys. They were all like strong and tall, and they had muscles, and I love working out at the military gym because I wasn't in the military, but I was working on a military base. And if you work on a military base, or at least this is how it was like for my military base. I mean, all military bases in Canada are run differently, but in the military base that I worked at, if you work on the base, like for example, I worked in human resources, I was an HR assistant. So I worked in HR, and when you work in HR, when you work in human resources, you do get a lot of clearance. I had a high security clearance. I had a high security clearance. I worked in HR. I worked in human resources. I wasn't in the military, but I worked on a military base and I worked in the HR department. I worked in human resources. So I did kind of have a high clearance, military clearance. And I liked everyone. I mean, I liked the military guys. I mean, they were all tall and strong, and they had muscles, and they were really masculine. Most of them, not this guy. This guy's a weirdo, but a lot of them were nice people. And but it just takes like five bad apples. It wasn't everybody. I didn't. I had a lot of friends too, and but it was like five psychopaths that made my life hell. Like not this guy, but it was five people like this guy. It was five psychopaths in the workplace that harassed me in the workplace, made my life hell, made my life miserable, and that's why I learned Russian for many years because like I wanted to like after what Canada did to me, after the Canadian government wrongfully fired me and then lied about me and blacklisted me from employment, I had like nothing. I had nobody. I was homeless. I was homeless for years. And then you have this psychopath who like has not only has one house but he has three houses, and he goes around and he's murdering innocent people, and he's a psychopath and he gets away with it. And the Canadian police are psychopaths too, and they get away with it. And all of these psychopaths, they have like three four houses and a private jet, and they have all of this, and like I'm literally homeless and I had done nothing wrong. I just was doing my job in the workplace, and I was wrongfully fired after 3 years, and they tried to paint me as a bad employee. They tried to paint me as as a troublemaker, and I wasn't a troublemaker. I was a nice guy, and I just was doing my job, and I just was reporting the truth, and I just was reporting what was happening, and I didn't want to lie, and I didn't lie, and I was telling the truth. And there's a lot of office politics, and I don't like office politics. I can't handle office politics. Office politics, I don't like office politics. And I'm just a nice person who just tells the truth. And I don't like confrontation, and I'm not confrontational. And so the bullies in the workplace, they saw that they could bully me, and they got away with bullying me. And then I was wrongfully fired. And then when I tried to sue to correct what happened, to tell the truth of my side of the story, when I tried to sue, they made me look stupid. They made me look foolish. They told lies about me. They slandered me. They defamed me. They blacklisted me from employment. So that's why when I was reading that page before, it was like, it was a little bit emotional because like Jesus, man, like, it's not fair. Life is not fair. Life did not work out for me. I did so many things right, and I got so much abuse, and I was, I had struggled. My whole life was nothing but struggles, and I just want to be a scientist. I even want to go to marketing school. I went to marketing college. I went to business college, marketing college. That's why I ended up working in HR because I did a bunch of courses in HR. So I did about 10 courses in HR. I did 20 courses in marketing, and I did like several many courses in business administration. So I did a lot of courses in business administration. I did a lot of courses in marketing, and I did a handful of courses in HR. So that's why I was qualified enough to work as an HR assistant in the HR department of military base Borden. And they harassed me and they abused me, and especially this one manager would take credit for my work, and I was the one doing a lot of the work, and then he would come in and he would lie, and he was a sociopath, and he took credit for work that I did, and all he did was party all week because he was one of those like attractive guys. So I was like a nerd. I was like a nerd who just did his work, and I did good work, but I was a nerd. And then there was like this attractive guy who was like, he was like a party guy, and all he did was party, and then he took credit for my work. And then when he was, when they were going after him about being incompetent, then he got me fired. Like, anyways.